Okay, hi everyone. Can you all see and hear me all right? Excellent. All right, so today we're going to talk about machine functionalism, but our approach is going to be a little bit different. Um, I'm loosely following Kim's chapter on machine functionalism, and there's a couple reasons for that. I'm going to be riffing a lot today because this is an area that I know um, pretty much inside and out. And I feel like less obligated to follow Kim's approach here. I'd rather do it my own way. So I'm going to tell you about machine functionalism, but I'm going to do it in a different way than Kim does it. Um, that's not to say that you won't find his readings helpful. You certainly will. So definitely still read his chapter, and certainly you should read Hilary Putnam's paper and Alan Turing's paper if you haven't already. So we'll kind of follow the same direction as Kim, but our analysis will be a little bit different in terms of style. Um, yeah, one reason is I know this area pretty much inside and out. I am also still sick. I'm getting better, but I'm still, experiencing very low energy levels. Um, and also, I think this is the way I did this the first time I lectured on this chapter, and then I just never changed it. Way back when I taught this course for like I think the second time I taught it was when I adopted Kim's textbook, and yeah, I just haven't changed it since. I don't really see the need to. So some of what you're going to get here is from Jaguan Kim's chapter. A lot of it is also drawn from portions of Jose Luis Bermudez's book, Cognitive Science: An Introduction to the Science of the Mind. If you're a cognitive science student, you're probably familiar with that textbook. It is like literally the textbook that the Department of Cognitive Science uses for, what was called Intro to Cognitive Science when I taught it way back when. Now I believe it's called Issues or something. I don't know. It's yeah, CGSC 2001B, whatever that course is called now. It's probably this textbook they're still using. Some of it is based on other learning materials that I've used for my first year seminar on minds and machines. Some of you may have taken that course with me previous to this one. And some of it is based on my PhD thesis, actually. So I will let you know when we're kind of dipping into one of these sources besides Kim. Oh, theories of cognitive science. Yeah, yeah, that sounds right. I don't know because they since the last time I taught that course, they changed the name. They didn't change the course code, but they changed the name of the course. So yeah, but theories in cog sci sounds right. So anyway, that's just a bit of a preface for today's lecture. Um, yes. So let's get into it. So we're going to talk about machine functionalism, which is due to this fellow, Hilary Putnam, who was an important figure in analytic philosophy, especially in the philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, but also philosophy of mathematics and philosophy of mind. Um, Worked closely with other philosophers like Saul Kripke, and he borrows extensively from the work of Alan Turing, which is why I not only have as a supplemental reading Putnam's paper, Psychological Predicates, which is the paper that really kind of kicked off functionalism, but also Turing's paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. Um, that is not the paper that Turing actually formalizes computation in. That's actually an earlier paper called On Computable Numbers with an application to the decision problem. That paper is highly technical. You can go and read it if you want to, but unless you have a somewhat advanced understanding of mathematics, computer science, and so forth, it is going to be a difficult read. Computing Machinery and Intelligence boils it all down in a much more accessible way, and it also introduces the Turing test, which we'll talk about toward the end of the lecture. So Kim, or rather Putnam, is drawing on Turing in a big way. So let's talk about Turing. I'm surprised actually that Kim doesn't really, well, he does spend a lot of time talking about Turing machines, but I don't really think that Kim emphasizes the importance of this with respect to the computational theory of mind as much as he could. Um, that's not a criticism. It's just it's a blank that I would like to fill in. Um, so Turing famously formalized the notion of computation as algorithmic or rule-governed information processing. Putnam picks this up and basically creates machine functionalism by proposing that uh, in the same way that well, if Turing machines are what computers are, then what we are a kind of Turing machine. The mind is a kind of Turing machine, a probabilistic Turing machine to be specific. So let's just take that as our sort of baseline assumption, and this is starting from some of the stuff that Bermuda says in his textbook. Um, if the mind is a computer, an information processing machine, there's a couple of ways we can try and understand it, right? Um, we could look at the machinery itself, or we could imagine, or we could examine what the machine does, right? How it functions as a computer. We can forget about the implementational details. This is the notion that we mentioned in the lecture before last when we talked about identity theory, the notion of multiple realizability, right? Keep another interesting bit of trivia, which I probably don't have to mention, but which I find interesting, is that the word computer used to be a job description, not a machine, not a thinking machine. This is important for understanding how Turing formalizes the notion of computation, which we'll look at shortly. But basically, prior to Turing, computer was a job. You would crunch numbers, you would have tables, spreadsheets, you would have a set of instructions, which is you are not allowed to deviate from, uh, somewhat like a computer program, and the human computer would run those numbers. Yeah, like a human calculator. Exactly, Lee, like in Hidden Figures. Yeah, the people in that movie who are working for NASA, like at that time, NASA had computers. They had like big giant mainframes that took up entire rooms. I think one of the characters learns Fortran or something. Um, Fortran or COBOL or one of those early programming languages so that she can use this big giant computer. Um, but yeah, the humans, the women in the movie, the three women who were like the main characters who were crunching the numbers for the Apollo space program. Yeah, they're basically human computers. Another really good illustration is the film The Imitation Game, which is about Alan Turing himself, right? Those people like Turing is trying to build a computer at Bletchley Park that can work out the settings on these Enigma machines that the Nazis used to send messages. The reason why he's trying to make a digital computer to do this is because there's just not enough time or enough human computers available to work out the settings on these machines before they're changed. And so Turing says, well, we'll build a machine that will do what the humans can do much faster. So there are human computer. Yeah, well, Christopher is a computer that he has at home, named after his childhood friend Christopher Morcom. Um, but the computer at Bletchley Park that they build is called the Bomb, Bombe, the Bomb. And Turing and his team were able to do that because Polish army officers and spies were able to smuggle out plans and working Enigma machines from Poland right around when the Nazis and the Soviets together occupied parts of Poland. So that was why they were able to do that. So, like, Turing didn't do any of this in a vacuum. But he was a pretty important figure nonetheless. So yeah, that was a job description, not a machine. Nowadays, we think of computers as machines, right? I'm talking to you on a computer. This is a computer. Downstairs, I have my PlayStation 5. That is a computer. Um, Hell, this fridge is is a simple computer in the sense that it's got like temperature settings and thermostats and different things like that. So we're very used to thinking of computers as machines, which of course computers are machines, but what computers really are information processing systems. And when we say that we are also computers, what we mean is that our minds are information processing systems. That gets us back to this. What do we want to do if we want to try to understand the mind as a computer? Do we look at the machinery on which it's implemented, like the brain, or do we examine what it does? Well, I think you can guess that from our discussion of psychoneural identity theory or type physicalism, that we don't need to be too concerned about the actual machinery. Um, we don't need to be too concerned with the hardware. Again, this is from Bermudez's chapter on computation. We don't really have to be like we could study the hardware, and we certainly do. That's what neuroscientists do. Um, Approach number two, looking at the mind as a functional system, would be like studying the hardware. Um, Now, or studying the software. This sort of hardware software analogy does have its flaws, right? There's no software loaded into the brain, right? Um, when you get a new computer, it comes with software installed. But back in the day, or maybe some of you do this now. Back in the day, though, I built my own computer. Um, I got parts. I got my tower. I got my motherboard. I got my CPU, hard disk drive, graphics card, sound card, all the whole shebang, right? And I put it together. And then, what do I have? Well, I have a computer, but I have the hardware, but there's no software. So what do? I install Windows XP, which comes on a little disk, right? Obviously, our minds aren't like that. Nobody, we're not installing the software of the mind. Andy Andy Clark talks about the brain not in terms of hardware and software, but in terms of wetware and mindware, which might be more apt. But just think of the mind as a formal system for thinking. That's what we're studying when we study the mind as a formal system. And we'll talk a little bit more about how exactly we should understand this idea, formal system, as we go. As Kim says in his chapter, and as you'll read in many other books on philosophy of mind and cognitive science, most people, most philosophers, most neuroscientists, most psychologists actually take the functionalist approach nowadays. Functionalism has, by and large, replaced identity theory and remains to this day pretty dominant within the cognitive sciences. Mm. So Liam says, our software is self-updating as neural pruning and plasticity. The software starts based on genetics and the mother's conditions. Yeah, but it's still not. I mean, you can kind of, yeah, it works to a limited extent that way. If the software on a computer is reducible to, a set of ones and zeros, then the initial software of the mind is going to be like, the initial neuronal connections in the mind. And like Liam says, right, as we grow, our mind actually develops lots of these connections. That's the neuroplasticity part. When we reach our teenage years, what happens is something called neural pruning, where a lot of unnecessary connections get pruned away. And this process kind of stops by the time we're in our mid 20s. It's kind of like, you know that saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. This is why if you develop a skill in childhood and then you don't continue practicing it into adulthood, you might not get it back, right? Like I remember when I was quite young, 6, 7, 8 years old, I was very good at drawing. Now I am not good at drawing because I stopped doing it. Um, Maybe I could get better at it again, but I would have to relearn everything, right? As opposed to if I could just continued practicing it. Um, so uh, yeah, functionalism is the dominant sort of approach in philosophy of mind and the cognitive sciences now. And of course, functionalism and this notion of multiple realizability are both due to Putnam. So the mind is studied as a formal or a functional system. What does that mean? Here, one of the ways you can take this is that it means abstract, right? In the sense that we're not we're not interested in the implementational details, the brain or the hardware, right? We're interested in the formal relations between states of the mind, like we are in the logical relations of the states of a Turing machine, as opposed to how the Turing machine is implemented. And I'll explain what a Turing machine is in a moment. So if you're not sure, don't worry about it. But yeah, we're not interested in the physical implementation. We're interested in the formal, that is abstract, logical, or functional relations between all of the states of the machine, all the states the machine can be in. So we're really trying to understand minds in terms of what they do and how they do it. We can look at the physical details, and it's probably important to do so. But we're not doing so in a reductive way, like the type physicalists were. So, for example, and this is drawn from Bermudez's work. Let's think of a different kind of machine, like a heart. A heart is a natural machine. What is it that makes something a heart? Is it what it's made of, like the muscle cells and the neurons? Is it how many chambers it has? What do you think? What is it that makes a heart a heart? Yeah, it pumps blood. It's the function of the heart. The essential feature of a heart, if you're a functionalist, is that it pumps blood. It pumps deoxygenated blood from around the body back to the lungs, and it pumps oxygenated blood from the lungs around to the rest of the body. If it does that, it's a heart. It doesn't matter what it's made of or what its structure is like. What matters is the function. So, um, for a functionalist, if I had one of those artificial hearts, they have these now. I'm not talking about a pacemaker. I'm talking about like a fully mechanical artificial heart. That counts as a heart. Sure, it's an artificial heart rather than a natural heart, but it's a heart nonetheless. Or the heart of a different kind of creature, right? Like the heart of a blue whale, for example, is enormous. Yeah, like Captain Picard's heart, exactly, right? He gets stabbed by some Nausicaans, right? Playing Domjot. I'm such a nerd. Yeah, he's playing Domjot back in the day. He's an arrogant young guy, gets stabbed, has to have an artificial heart, but it's a heart nonetheless. Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. That's Tapestries, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of the only episodes that features Q as a character that doesn't have like a Q pun for a title. Cupid, Q who, Q2, all of those, right? Of course, maybe it wasn't Q. It might have all just been in Picard's head. Who knows? A blue whale, the largest creature to have ever lived on the planet Earth. Doesn't matter if its heart is bigger than a Volkswagen van. Whereas ours can fit in the palm of our hand. Still a heart because it pumps blood. Other creatures like fish or reptiles can have hearts with a different number of chambers. So humans have four chambers in their hearts, right? We have the left atrium, left ventricle, right ventricle. Some fish or reptiles and amphibians have have like two or three chambers. Still a heart. And this gets us back to the notion of multiple realizability. A heart can be implemented in many different ways with different physical substrates. A heart is multiply realizable. um, oh my God, I hope this doesn't continue. I'm going to do my best to get through all this without losing my voice, okay? But we'll see. So a heart can be implemented in multiple different kinds of ways. Perhaps also cognitive functions can. Yeah, let me get some water. I'll be right back. Oh. I don't have ice water, but I have this blueberry pomegranate sparkling water. Yeah, yeah, that's what we'll do. We kind of did that last time, right? We took multiple short breaks. I think that's what we'll do. Okay. Now, could there be multiply realizable cognitive systems? Information processing systems? Yes. Let's come up with an example. One example I like to use is a calculator. Of course, nowadays, we all have, or most of us have, in our pockets, smartphones. And mine has a calculator app. So that is like a virtual calculator. It's just software on this device, right? But of course, there are other kinds of calculators. Can you think of any? Yeah, that's a good one, actually. Yeah, that's my favorite example. An abacus is a type of calculator. You know, the it has wires and it has beads, and the configurations of the beads represent numbers, and you can calculate that way. The Romans used abacus or abacuses, abaci, abacus. I don't know. The ancient Chinese, still until quite recently, the use of the abacus was quite prevalent in Japan. Um, yeah, the those graphing calculators, Lee. I had one of those too. So that's like a hardware calculator. The abacus is like an analog calculator. A cell phone, that's like a virtual calculator, right? And there are other examples, like I had one student mention a slide rule. That's something you might have seen in that movie, Hidden Figures, right? Slide rules, those little ruler things that engineers use to run calculations. That's another way to implement a calculator. Um, so there are lots of ways to implement calculators: virtual, physical, analog, digital. Um, that's multiple realizability as well. And one counterintuitive idea here is that if multiple realizability is true, if cognitive systems are multiply realizable, then it might even be a mistake to focus on the brain, right? We might believe that there are essential structures in the brain that are essential for cognition or certain aspects of cognition, which are actually just contingent on how brains evolved. Uh, and we see this like when we look at like multiple or neuroplasticity, for example. We know that brains change. Individual brains are different from one another, but brains can also rewire themselves. For example, somebody might suffer a stroke and lose some of their linguistic abilities, but with the right kind of like occupational therapy, speech therapy, they might get that ability back. What's happened there is that the brain has rewired itself. It's established new neural connections to implement the same cognitive function. And that's pretty illustrative of multiple realizability. Or think of non-human animal minds, right? I mean, the brains of human beings are different from the brains of other mammals. Mammals' brains are different from those of fish, amphibians, reptiles. But we all agree that most of these creatures can sense their environment, navigate within it, experience certain sensations like pain. And these are all realized differently. And conceivably, there might be aliens out there, right, with very different physiologies than we have. Maybe they're not even carbon based, right? They go blorg when their Zork matrices fire, as opposed to ouch when their C fibers fire, right? That's conceivable. This is why um, functionalism sort of spelled the downfall of identity theory, right? But yeah, neuroplasticity, animal minds, conceivable alien minds, and even neural reuse. Um, these are things actually we've learned by studying the brain that support a sort of functionalism. Neural reuse, by the way, is this idea that where there were areas of the brain that we thought were specialized to very, very specific tasks, they're actually recruited for other kinds of tasks that we didn't think of. So if I say to you Broca's area, maybe we have some neuroscience students in the class, what is Broca's area implicated in? Yeah, language, but specifically output, right? Like there's a type of brain disorder called Broca's aphasia, where damage to Broca's area damages speech output. It was named after a French neuroscientist named Paul Broca, who had a patient named Tong, like like that was his nickname. And the reason he was named that was because he had a massive stroke, which like completely destroyed that area of the brain. And he was only ever able to say "ton, ton, ton." Um, he could understand what you were telling him. There was no problem with input, but output very damaged. If you've seen Game of Thrones, you know Hodor, right? Hodor is like Broca's patient Tom. Can only say one thing, but he can understand what's being said to him. But it turns out that Broca's area is not just for language, it's for linearizing all kinds of outputs, even musical outputs. So if you're playing a musical instrument and you need to know, and you need to, your brain is sorting out what note follows the next note and so on and so on. If you had damage to Broca's area, you would have trouble with that, just as you would have trouble, like you would have Broca's aphasia with speech. So that's neural reuse. Likewise with the fusiform face area. We used to think maybe this area of the brain, which is located in your fusiform gyrus, is for recognizing faces and only recognizing faces. But it's actually for recognizing patterns that we are experts at recognizing. So, um, like chess grandmasters, it's been found they use the fusiform face area when evaluating chess positions, legal chess positions. There was a guy, there was an ornithologist who suffered from basically it was a case of acquired prosopagnosia, which is the inability to recognize faces because of damage to his fusiform gyrus. He also lost the ability to recognize different species of birds, and that's because he was using his fusiform face area was implicated in his bird expertise. Another of a farmer who not only could not recognize faces of humans, but also could no longer recognize the faces of his cows, right? Before he could recognize, oh, that's this cow, that's that cow. No longer he was able to do that. So all of these things, neuroplasticity, the difference between human and non-human minds, neural reuse, these all kind of point to a sort of weak version of functionalism. Um, so that's weak functionalism. We'll call the idea that the physical realization doesn't matter at all strong functionalism. Now, if this is all true, um, uh, if this is all true, what can we say about machines? Right. If functionalism is a good theory of the mental, and multiple realizability is true, what can we say about machines? Can we say of certain machines that they have minds or that they think? Well, not to get ahead of myself, but I think the answer is yes. Um, but let's review some of the antecedents to functionalism. Guys, I think I might need a 5 minute break to give my voice a bit of a rest. Okay. Let's see. 307, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or 308. Let's come back at 313. I will see you then. Okay. All right. I'm here. I have not died, and I will try and describe to you some of the philosophical antecedents of functionalism. Again, this is quite different from Kim's approach. Kim, at least, in this book, is not really somebody who's concerned too much with the history of philosophy, at least not anything beyond the immediate history of what he's talking about. Other than, Descartes. It seems like the history of philosophy of mind for a lot of thinkers starts with Descartes. Although Kim does mention Plato, I think there's some interesting historical antecedents of functionalism that are worth mentioning. One of these is actually Aristotle. Um, and in De Anima, or On the Soul, Aristotle writes, "But since it is also a body of such and such a kind, namely having life, the body cannot be soul. The body is the subject or matter, not what is attributed to it. Hence the soul must be a substance in the sense of the form of a natural body having life potentially, this should say potentiality within it. But substance is actuality, and thus the soul is the actuality of a body as above characterized." Now that's pretty dense. Um, but what Aristotle is saying is that the soul, and remember the part of the soul that is the mind for somebody like Aristotle is your rational soul, which is part of the soul. To have a soul, the soul is just the form of an organized body, a living body. So the soul is the form of it's the way you're organized, the way you're structured, the way everything works, in virtue of which you are alive. That is your soul. And this is because Aristotle is espousing a view called hylomorphism, which comes from hule, which means matter, and morphe, which means form, right? So for somebody like Plato, remember our discussion way back when we began the course. For Plato, the forms are the most real thing, right? This cup, for example, we would all say, oh, this is a real cup, right? It exists mind independently out there in the world. And Plato would say, well, no, this cup right here, this is like a mere shadow of the form of the cup. And that form is the most real thing. The form of the cup is where all cups that exist get their reality from, right? Now, Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, says no, sure, form is important, but without matter, form is nothing. It's just an idea or a concept. And without form, matter is just matter. It's just stuff. It's not anything. But if matter is informed, you can have cups, tables, chairs, humans, animals, whatever. So that's hylomorphism. It's also really connected to Aristotle's theory of causality, right? Which is a very different way of thinking about causality than we're used to. We're used to thinking of physical causation, right? Or what I've called in previous lectures billiard ball causation, right? The cue stick strikes the cue ball, which strikes the eight ball, which goes into the corner pocket. A causes B, causes C, causes D. For Aristotle, causation doesn't work that way. For Aristotle, things have four causes. They have a formal cause, that's their form. They have um, uh, they have the formal cause. They have the efficient cause, which is what brings them into being. I'm blanking on one of these causes. I think it's material, but what is it made of? And then the final cause. What is its end or purpose? So there are actually four causes, right? Not not one. Yeah, Liam, sure. Uh, uh, well, it's not potentiality. It is the soul is like the soul, like he says here, is the actuality of a living body. So the soul, in plain language, the soul is the form and function that the material of your body takes such that you are alive, right? Imagine this, right? What is the human body made of? Just approximately, what are we made of? What is the material of the body, the matter of the body? It's not quite like that, Holly. But maybe with this example we can clarify, right? But yeah, Samantha, water, a lot of water, right? A lot of carbon. The carbon makes our flesh, muscles, and bones, as Liam says. Also, there's in our bones, there's calcium. There's like iron in our blood. There's lots of other things that we're made of. We've got, a little bit of magnesium, a little bit of iodine, right? Maybe you'll see where I'm going with this. So, who is familiar with the eminently philosophical work, Full Metal Alchemist? Okay, so you probably know where I'm going with this, right? Um, well, Liam, not everything has a soul. Every living thing has a soul for Aristotle. Yeah, May, I agree. Brotherhood is awesome. So whether you've read the manga, seen the original, or watched Brotherhood, which is the manga accurate anime adaptation, You basically get the idea, right? Edward and Alphonse Elric want to bring their mother back with alchemy, and so they need a body. So they get all the stuff that a human is made of, right? And they put that stuff in a thing and they try to do their alchemy, and of course it doesn't work. I'm not spoiling anything. This is like the premise of the show, so if you haven't seen it, don't worry about it. But yeah, it doesn't work. But the idea is like, if Aristotle would say, you can have all that material and throw it in a bucket and mix it up, and all you're going to have is a big bunch of goo. What matters is that it's put together in the right way and that it all functions in the right way, such that you are alive. That way that you're put together, that way that you function, the way the matter of your body is organized is your soul. Yeah. And so for Aristotle, every living thing has at least some part of soul. Plants have a nutritive soul. So they can grow, reproduce, take in nutriment, expel waste. Trees use water and soil nutrients. They use carbon monoxide from the air, carbon dioxide, and they exhale oxygen. So trees have a nutritive soul. Animals have the nutritive soul, but they also have a sensitive soul, which allows them to sense their environment and act within the environment. And humans have those two plus a rational soul, which gives us reason. Things that are not alive don't have souls, but they do. But all matter has this sort of entelechy, like it wants to be informed. Um, and that's why there can be like tables and chairs and artifacts and stuff. So those things don't have souls. They do, but the matter that they are made of has this sort of feature called entelechy. Um, so that's Aristotle, an important, um, I think, antecedent of functionalism. Absolutely. Thomas Hobbes is another big one. Thomas Hobbes, the early modern English philosopher and political scientist. In his book Leviathan, he anticipates functionalism. This is the introduction. Um, and the spelling is weird because this is actually untranslated from Elizabethan English, which is the language of Shakespeare. That's why the spelling is weird. Nature, he wrote, the art whereby God hath made and governs the world is by the art of man, as in many other things, so in this also imitated, that it can make an artificial animal. For seeing that life is but a motion of limbs, the beginning whereof is in some principal part within, why may we not say that all automata, engines that move themselves by springs and wheels, as doth a watch, have an artificial life? And later in chapter 5 of book 1, he says, reason is nothing but reckoning, that is, adding and subtracting, of the consequences of general names agreed upon for the marking and signifying of our thoughts. I say marking them when we reckon by ourselves, and signifying when we demonstrate or approve our reckonings to other men. Um, the first bit from the introduction is kind of, it's not really Aristotelian because Hobbes is by this time, Hobbes and other contemporary thinkers like Descartes had dispensed with Aristotelian metaphysics, right? They were not dealing with his notion, they were no longer dealing with the Aristotelian notion of causality, material, formal, efficient, and final causes. They had dispensed with that. But there is a similarity there in that, if life is just how stuff works, not what it's made of, then automata are alive in a certain sense. And we've made these living automata just as God has made us, right? So this is more about life. And the reason why he's doing this, by the way, is because he's going to go on and argue that the state is a giant artificial person, right? So to explain how the state works, he has to explain how people work. So that's why Hobbes does this in the Leviathan, right? Here he's talking more about what thinking is, and this really precedes computationalism. Reasoning is nothing but reckoning, adding and subtracting the consequences of general names agreed upon, like our concepts. I mean, really what Hobbes is describing here is something like symbolic logic, right? Um, but he's doing it before we had really got there. Um, it's like doing math with concepts. Very much like what a computer does. I also think that the 18th century thinker Julian Offray de la Mettrie sounds a bit like a functionalist. Others treat him like an epiphenomenalist. I'm not sure I agree with that. But in his book, L'Homme Machine, or Man Machine, he kind of rants against Descartes, right? He's very provocative. We're talking about a guy who died after trying to prove his gastronomic capacity by eating loads and loads of like pheasant liver pate at a banquet held by Frederick the Great. Or something like I think the Prussian ambassador to France invites him over. Lemettre's like, I'm such a manly man that I can eat more than anyone, and might have eaten himself to death. I don't know. Very strange, very strange fellow. But he wrote, man's preeminent advantage is his organism. This is what he means is like he's writing at a time when humans, there's still this very Cartesian view of humans as over and above the animal kingdom. Animals are beast machines if you're a Cartesian, beast machines without reason. Um, Aristotle would have argued the same or something very similar. Animals have no reason. Humans are a zoon, econ, logon, an animal with reason, or an animal with logos, the ability to use speech, right? Lemaitre says, no, no, we're animals just like other animals, and we have advantages due to our organism, like our hands, our vocal cords, and our big brains. But other animals have other advantages over us. Dogs have amazing sense of smell, birds can fly and have excellent eyesight, right? If we're superior in some ways, it's because our organism confers us with some advantages, and our brain confers us with an advantage of reason. But other animals have other advantages, and even, we might not even be that superior to certain of these animals. I mean, I think Lemaitre was actually the first to suggest that if apes could be taught sign language, we would actually be able to communicate with them because they're intelligent, and he was proven to be correct in the 20th century, and I think that's pretty neat. Um, so yeah, we're superior in some ways, but other animals are superior to us in other ways. I think elsewhere in this book he says, to make this point, he's like, what animal would drown in a river of milk? Man alone. Meaning like, you know like just look at a baby. Babies are so helpless. A baby would drown in a river of milk. But other animals, they're up and off as soon as they hit the ground, right? So all humans and animals for Lemaitre have a soul, have a mind by virtue of their organism. I guess we should talk a little bit more about what we mean by formal and functional systems. Hmm. And these include things like the Turing machines we're going to talk about, but also things like logic. These systems are sound and complete, and they are made out of symbols. And these symbols can mean things, right? And we can create expressions out of these symbols which state things, and we can use those to reason things out. The actual symbols that we use don't matter, right? Like if you've taken a logic course, you know these logical symbols, right? You probably know like, your signs for and or and there exists and right? You guys know what I mean if you've taken a logic course? I mean, those symbols could have been different. Like you know how there's the existential quantifier, it's that backwards letter E, that backwards letter E looking thing, it means there exists. So you use it to say like there exists an A, and A is such that blah blah blah, and A has certain properties, right? Well, those symbols could have all been different. Doesn't matter. What matters is the functional or formal relations between the symbols. That's what matters. And so we can assign meanings to the symbols, and the structure of our system is what preserves meaning. Yeah, that's right. They will. They will. If you're doing, I forget what kind of math, but math and logic are, they're like this. Math and logic are like this. Logic is kind of just like math without the numbers. Logic is math, but with concepts. Um, and math is logic, but with numbers. And I'm not that great at either of them, I'll be honest with you. Um, much more of an ordinary language guy. But the point is what they mean. What's important in a formal system is what the symbols mean, so that's their semantics, and how each symbol is related to the other symbols. That's the syntax. Now, the syntax is kind of baked into the system. The semantics come from outside. We decide what the symbols mean. But the syntax allows it all to work. Now, this is important for Turing machines because Turing machines are also formal systems. Have I not? Oh, mm. So we're going to get into Turing machines shortly. I haven't told you what a Turing machine is just yet, but I do want to tell you before we get going that they are formal systems, functional systems, and there are a couple of ways we could describe them. We could describe the Turing machine in terms of its physical states and physical composition, or we could describe it in terms of its logical states. And that is what matters for our purposes. And basically, don't worry too much about what's on this slide, but basically, where we're going to end up is that the mind is a Turing machine. The physical realization of the mind is very different from that of a sort of classic Turing machine, as we'll see. But the logical states are what we're concerned with, or the formal or functional relations between the states. That's what we're concerned with. Well, what are Turing machines anyway? Um, I'm going to take another 5 minutes to rest my voice. Maybe have some cough syrup, actually. So I have 3:33 on my clock. Let's come back at 3:42, and I'll tell you all about Alan Turing, who is my hero, by the way. Uh, just saying. Don't want to get ahead of myself, but I don't have a lot of heroes, but I think Alan Turing might be one of them. Yeah, I'll share some. I'll share some thoughts about the movie too. Okay, I'll be back. Uh, See you in 5. Okay. Oh, thanks for bearing with me, everybody. I took some cough syrup. So I'm hoping that that helps. We may still need to take frequent breaks, but we'll see. So yeah, I'll tell you a bit about Alan Turing and his work. Alan Turing was born in London in 1912. Quite a good mathematician. He completed his undergraduate studies at Cambridge, which is where he published this paper on the halting problem. And this is the paper that I mentioned earlier on computable numbers, where he actually outlines what we now call a Turing machine, which is a mathematical, like an idealized or imaginary mathematical sort of conception of a computer. Then he went to the United States and completed his doctorate in mathematics at Princeton under the supervision of Alonzo Church. And quite famously, he worked as a cryptographer at Bletchley Park as part of Project Ultra during the Second World War. So as I was saying earlier, The Nazis had these machines that the Allies called Enigma machines. And they had these little ciphers, right? These little rotors, a number, any 3, 5, 7. They got more and more complicated as the war went on. But these could be configured in such a way that if I typed in a message, in German, I would type it in, and then different letters would appear in the message, and that would be sent. And then the person on the other end receives it and decodes it with their Enigma machine that is set in sort of the reverse way, so that I encrypt as I send and they decrypt as they receive. Now, these machines were very, very hard to decrypt the old-fashioned way. And that's because even a three-rotor machine could be configured in like one of 150 million different possible ways. So there's not enough time, and there are not enough computational resources, i.e., human computers, to figure out the settings on the machine before the settings are changed, which was about every week, right? Um, so what Turing did when he got to Bletchley Park, which was where Project Ultra was, is he built these bombs that could work out the settings on the Enigma machines. This was huge, right? Because this was so classified, the full extent of his work was not known until not just after the war, but after his death, which was in the 1950s. Now, the film, uh, the film kind of touches on all elements of Turing's life. The Imitation Game, I mean. During the war, he was mostly concerned with cryptography. After the war, he became concerned with other areas like mathematical biology, the question of whether a machine could be said to think, and that is where we get the Turing test from his paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, which we'll discuss toward the end of the lecture. I think it is really, really, really tragic what happened to Turing. In 1952, his house was burgled by Arnold Murray. And in the course of investigating the burglary, it became known to the police that Arnold Murray and Alan Turing had previously been in a relationship with one another. And this is at a time when it was illegal to be homosexual in the United Kingdom, right? Turing was gay, and he was openly gay, right? But I mean, this was a strange time, like for queer individuals, right? In certain circles of society, you could more or less be openly gay, and also, and I feel quite I guess I feel somewhat comfortable in saying this because I am, at least in terms of my immediate ancestry, more or less English, so I know that culturally it's kind of a thing that you can know about and just not, it's fine as long as you don't talk about it. Do you know what I mean? That was kind of the attitude. The problem was, and this is something the film goes into, is that homosexuals could be blackmailed, right? If they were closeted, right? This was a big deal actually during the Cold War in Ottawa. I'm not sure if you guys are. Let me give you a little bit. Apologies for me as a straight person doing this, but I'm going to give you a little bit of queer history right here. Um, Now, in the Cold War in Ottawa, there were a lot of people, queer individuals, who also held important government positions because it's a government town. And there was one professor from Carleton University who invented a device called the fruit machine. Now, what did the fruit machine do? Yeah, Lee knows the fruit machine. Yeah. The fruit machine was supposed to take physiological readings, which would allow the person running the test to figure out whether somebody was gay or not, right? And it was almost exclusively used on gay men. So the idea, like, it sounds absurd now when we talk about this. But how the machine worked was it took physiological readings, pupil dilation, galvanic skin response, that kind of thing. And basically, you'd get your suspected gay guy into a room, show him a bunch of gay porn, and see if you can get a physiological reaction that you can detect with a fruit machine. And the idea was to identify um, homosexual individuals in important government roles so that you could get rid of them, so that they could not be blackmailed by, I don't know, Soviet spies or something, right? Needless to say, this machine did not work. Um, this whole, I think, attitude, the attitudes at the time were reflective of bigoted, antiquated views. Um, so it's not just Turing, right? I mean, this happened to a lot of people in the UK and in around the world. Was worried that if you were gay and if you were in the closet, you could potentially be blackmailed. You were potentially a security risk. This is kind of touched upon in the film, actually, um, but it was after the war that Turing was outed, and it was illegal. It violated Turing, just being who he was, violated the a law, which meant that Turing was charged with gross indecency, the same charge that was brought against Oscar Wilde. Now, Turing was given the choice. Um, you can go to prison and serve a prison term for gross indecency, or you can receive this sort of artificial estrogen therapy that causes chemical castration. And Turing chose the latter so that he didn't have to go to prison. This caused changes in personality, um, changes in physiology. I mean, Turing, the chemical castration worked, but Turing also developed female secondary sex characteristics, like he grew breasts, right? And in 1954, he was found dead. Now, there's still some debate about whether it was an accidental death or a suicide. I don't know um, whether Turing committed suicide or whether his death was accidental. It seemed that he had eaten an apple that had been laced with cyanide. He had potassium cyanide in his laboratory. Yeah, they did botch the investigation, and that's why I think we need an inquiry, and I think we need a sort of second look. We don't know that it was suicide. It very well could have been. It very well could have been accidental. But he died far younger than he should have after being put through an ordeal that he should never have been put through. Now, he was officially pardoned in 2014 by Queen Elizabeth II, which is good, right? And now there in the United Kingdom, there is the Alan Turing law, which actually retroactively pardons men in England and Wales who were criminally convicted for homosexual acts. That's a good thing. I think it's good to keep that in mind as a victory because, and I'm not trying to pick on the UK here, but right now the UK does not seem to be like a very legally a very nice place to be if you're trans, right? Um, uh, which is very unfortunate. Of course, Turing wasn't trans, uh, but I think what's going on there now, like the recent Supreme Court definition in the United Kingdom on the legal definition of woman, right, reminds us that the same sort of struggles that Turing faced are not over for a lot of people. And as far as I'm concerned, Turing was a hero. It's estimated it's estimated by some historians that Turing's work might have shortened the war by up to 2 years, and that and that the intelligence he was able to gather might have saved up to 15 million lives. I mean, that's amazing. And all of this had to be kept quite secret, right? Whenever there's a scene in the movie where they crack their first message, and it's like, we've got to tell them they're going to get attacked. No, we can't tell them because then the Nazis will know. Well, that's definitely above Turing's pay grade. But that is how this information was handled, right? William Churchill, or Winston Churchill, the prime minister during the war, designated all of this ultra secret information. That's why it was called Project Ultra. And no intelligence was acted upon unless there was a plausible cover for how the Allies got that information. That's how tightly, like, the Nazis didn't know that the Brits had broken the Enigma code, and they managed to keep it that way for the duration of the war. Um, and that's why I think Alan Turing is so important. The film is good, I think, but the film does do some funny stuff like that I'm not a big fan of. The film is about Turing and his team at Hut 8, but there were so many people involved in this. Um, the way they depict the roles of some of them, like Joan Clark, Keira Knightley's character, in the film, she just kind of shows up and solves a crossword and is joins Hut 8. That's not how that happened. I mean, Joan Clark was a leading mathematician. She was brilliant in her own right. She did not join Project Ultra by being good at crosswords. She came highly recommended by her mathematics professor. I like Benedict Cumberbatch as an actor, but the way he played Turing was very weird to me. You guys, anybody else get that? I mean, Cumberbatch is always kind of typecast as the smart guy, you know? But the way that he played Turing was kind of like as a stereotypical autistic person, like a Sheldon Cooper sort of person. Yeah, they played it up a lot. Um, and there we can speculate till the cows come home. Was Turing on the spectrum? Yeah, I like his version of Sherlock Holmes too. But Sherlock Holmes is a fictional character, right? And when you read Arthur Conan Doyle's stories, like, he is actually like that. But the real life Turing wasn't exactly like he was played in the movie by Cumberbatch. And Cumberbatch played him as almost like some kind of super Asperger's sort of guy. Um, was Turing possibly on the spectrum? Possibly. We don't know. The diagnosis didn't exist at that time. And there are things about him which make you think, yeah, he might have been on the spectrum. But playing him so stereotypically, I was not a fan of, right? And that's why I mentioned Sheldon Cooper, right? Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. He has like all the autisms, you know? Like, people, there are autistic people with eidetic memories, and there are autistic people with, you know, uh, rigid routines, and but Sheldon is like an amalgam of every autistic stereotype. And I found that that was kind of the way Turing was portrayed in the film. And I had a problem with that because, like, look, it would not have been okay to portray Turing as a gay man, as just a stereotypical gay man, right? But for some reason, it's all right to make him an autism stereotype. That's my one sort of complaint about this movie, right? I don't know if any of you share that complaint. That's just a personal little gripe I have with the film. But otherwise, yeah, I don't mind Benedict Cumberbatch's acting. Maybe it's just because he's always typecast as the smart person. I don't know. So, what is a Turing machine anyway? We should finally explain what a Turing machine is. Well, a Turing machine is. Oh goodness, the cough syrup does nothing. A Turing machine is how Alan Turing formalized the notion of computation. He did this while trying to address a problem known as a halting problem. Now, in computer science, there are these things called decision problems, right? A or B. A or B. That's simple. That's a decision problem. And we can write programs to solve decision problems. But we also want to know whether our program is defined in such a way that it can answer the problem, or will it just keep going indefinitely? That problem of knowing whether a program, whether you can know whether a certain particular decision problem has a solution, is the halting problem. So uh, Turing wanted to know, is there a procedure that can do this? To find out, he formalized the notion of computation as this mechanical procedure, right? He basically took what human computers did and said, what if this was automatized by a machine? He did this by borrowing the notion of an algorithm, of the algorithm, which is an unambiguous set of rules that you can apply to a set of objects to transform that set in a definite and circumscribed way. And again, it's strange to me why Kim doesn't talk about this. I completely understand why Kim doesn't talk about any of the autobiographical details of Turing's life that I've talked about here. But to skip through this seems weird to me. So the idea of the algorithm, by the way, is very old, right? It goes back to, I think it's an old Islamic thinker named Al-Khwarizmi, who during the Islamic Golden Age was like, why do we got to have a different way of solving each different problem? We should have one procedure that works for a set of problems that are similar enough. And so he came up with that notion, which we now call the algorithm after Al-Khwarizmi. And so Turing knew about this because he was a mathematician. And he said, well, what if we thought of computation as this mechanical rule-governed procedure and a mechanical algorithmic procedure rather than as a job that humans do? So he imagines a Turing machine. Um, Now this is a Turing machine, but you've got to keep in mind that Turing machines are not meant to actually be built. Turing machines are imaginary machines. This is just a representation of what one might look like if we built one. I'm just going to try and get through this slide, and then I think I need another break. So, what's a Turing machine? Got an infinitely long tape, which you can see here. On the tape, there are cells, which we can write information into, delete information, all symbolic information. It's got a machine head right here. Moves the tape to the right or the left, write symbols, delete symbols, etc. It's got a window that displays the state of the machine. It has a machine table, which you can think of as a number of different ways. The machine table contains every possible state the machine can be in. And depending on what your machine is specialized for, can also be thought of as containing the instructions or the program for the computer, for the Turing machine. It's 4 o'clock. I think I'm going to need a 10-minute break to rest my voice. Is that all right with all of you? I'm really sorry, everyone. Thank you. So 10 minutes. I'll drink some more water, maybe make some honey lemon tea. Thanks, everybody, for bearing with me. I don't know what this is, but oh my goodness, I'm almost over it, but my throat is just not cooperating today. So, okay, so I'll see you all in 10 minutes. Okie dokie. Ah, yes, Paul shared Lego Turing Machine video. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna watch that later. Also, there is I hope it's still a thing. I hope the company didn't go under, but it's an interesting toy called the Turing Tumble, where you can build little logic gates on a little kind of board, and you drop a marble through it, and you can kind of like see how it all works. Very cool. I've often thought I'd like to have one of those for my philosophy classes, actually. Um, Okay. Other things you want to know about a Turing machine. All right. So a Turing machine has a tape, an infinite tape, kind of like the tape from like a VHS tape. So there are cells, and on the cells you can write information in the form of symbols. In the Kim chapter, he illustrates with this with like just unitary notation. So everything is the number one, right? So one is one on one cell. Two is one on one cell and one on the cell immediately next to it. Three is one, 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 right? One, just three cells each with the symbol one, right? And those symbols represent information. The machine head can move the tape, write and delete symbols, etc. And the machine table contains all of the possible states the machine could be in. Um, and so, Turing machines are deterministic, right? They're completely determined by the current state of the machine, what's in the machine table, what's on the tape, etc. The Turing machines that Putnam has us imagine are probabilistic, not deterministic. Just keep that in mind for now. Now, by imagining the machines, these Turing machines, that gave Turing what he needed um, in order to address the halting problem. The notion of a Turing machine as a sort of computer and computation as a rule governed algorithmic sort of information processing. Transitioning from state A to state B to state C in a rule governed algorithmic way, right? The machine has a finite number of states, and it can only be in one state at a time. And for that reason, Turing calls these discrete state machines. But the interesting thing about these Turing machines is, although they're imaginary, um, everything about them can be represented numerically, right? The machine table, the state of the machine, everything can be represented as a series of numbers. And that allowed Turing to generate mathematical proofs about the properties of Turing machines and about the sorts of things that we have them do. Um, One of the things that Turing showed was that there actually is no solution to the halting problem. He also proved that there exists a universal Turing machine. The examples in Kim's chapter are particularly helpful here, and they can be a little bit daunting when you look at them. You look at the machine table and you look at the strings of symbols on the tape, and you're kind of like, what the, what, right? Did anyone have that impression, by the way, when they read Kim's chat? I mean, when you read, if you read it, I hope you read it. I hope you did. Let's open it up. I'll show you what I mean. But who read it and who has yet to read it? We'll put it that way. Let's see. Mind as a computer. Mm. Let's go to where those examples are. Or maybe all of you are still on break and you, oh no, there's someone. That's okay, Paul. Okay, so we need to get past all this, find our way to the Turing machines. So this right here on page 140 of Kim's book, it might look a bit daunting. Um, yeah, I get it, Holly. Go to YouTube. Yeah, the logic is tricky. Yeah. Okay, so Samantha's a bit more familiar. But yeah, you know what? Like if you haven't read Turing's work before, or you're not maybe taking the same kind of stuff that Samantha's taking, this stuff is going to look a bit daunting, right? But all this means, like this is a program that adds positive integers, and here we're adding 3 plus 2 to get 5. Um, so we're running our program, which is to add 3 plus 2. The initial state is 3 plus 2, and we want to get to 5. And this is what the symbols on the tape would look like. These little scratch symbols define the boundary of the problem. And so we have our little machine head, which is in state 0. And we want to go from this to this. And all the machine head does is go one cell at a time to the right. It finds this plus symbol, writes in a 1, goes over here, skips here, writes in here, puts in a scratch symbol. So now instead of 3 plus 2, we have 5. That's it. That's all there is to it. That's how our machine adds 3 plus 5. Yeah, I mean, if you've taken logic or computers, computer science stuff, you're going to run into these. These are automata in the mathematical computer science sense, not the philosophical or robotic sense. And this is the machine table. This just represents all the states the machine can be in as it goes from here to here. That's all there is to it. That's all you need to know. You don't need to be concerned with like the particulars of the symbols or particular problems. You just need to know that we have an initial state, a goal state, and this machine table represents all the steps the machine goes through to get to here from here to here. That is it. That's all you need to know. That's the in a nutshell what the Turing machine is doing, right? Now, that Turing machine that we looked at in Kim is a specialized Turing machine. Kim gives us a bunch of different examples. Like, there's not just a Turing machine for addition, but for subtraction. And we can also have Turing machines for multiplication and division, because multiplication and division are just different kinds of addition and subtraction, right? So we can have all these specialized Turing machines. And one thing that Turing proved was that there's a special kind of Turing machine called the universal Turing machine. And a universal Turing machine can run any specialized Turing machine. So the universal Turing machine is essentially the theoretical forerunner to modern day digital computers. Turing called them universal computers. Nowadays, we just call them computers. But if the Church Turing thesis is correct, then all of these computers that we use are basically just Turing machines. They're just specific implementations of this basic idea of a Turing machine. Yeah, and he also proved there's no solution to the halting problem. It's not decidable whether a machine will run forever or arrive at a solution. It's not something that you can compute your way to an answer to. But, and this is the church Turing thesis, um, anything that can be solved algorithmically, that is anything that you can solve with math, can be solved by a Turing machine. So any algorithmically expressed or any problem that can be algorithmically expressed is decidable or computable. You don't really need to be too concerned about that beyond the fact that what this means for us is that there is there are universal Turing machines, and our minds might be Turing machines as well. They might be Turing machines in the sense that they're computers, in the further sense that computation, all computation or thinking or cognition is transforming these representations according to certain algorithms, transferring a set of objects using a step-by-step definite and circumscribed procedure into a different set of objects. But with the mind, it's not symbols on a Turing machine tape, it's mental representations, right? And this is where Putnam comes in. When Putnam comes into the picture, Putnam says, look, minds are functional systems like computers are. And it doesn't matter what the mind is made of, how it's physically realized. What matters is how the system functions. Any questions so far? In this paper, the supplementary readings, and in some other very famous publications by Putnam, he uses the C fibers example, right? A statement like Josh is in pain, as we've seen in some of our other supplementary readings, uh, can't mean the same as Josh's C fibers are firing. So they can't mean the same thing. That's not what's important for Putnam, though. And the other, even identity theorists dispensed with this worry. If you read Smart's paper, you'll recall that, well, my knowing I'm in pain isn't exactly the same as me knowing that my C fibers are firing, but it doesn't really matter that that my C fibers firing, is that is like opaque to me in some sense. Like, but it doesn't really matter for Putnam because what matters are again those formal relations, the logical relations or the functional relations. And we've seen this before, right? There are, as we talked about earlier today and in other lectures, there are creatures with very different physiologies. Maybe they don't have C fibers, but we wouldn't deny that they can experience pain. Likewise with aliens, with very different physiologies from us. We wouldn't deny that they could potentially experience pain. Our C fibers firing are one way to physically realize the state of being in pain, but being in pain is not reducible to C fibers firing. And this is all by way of criticizing identity theory or type physicalism, right? I think maybe we'll skip this slide. And I'm skipping over a lot of what's in Kim, but I suppose the main takeaway is that, I mean, well, let me stop. Let me stop and ask if anyone has any questions before I get to the main point, or before I try and summarize. Then we go on to the imitation game in the Chinese room, which, if I'm being honest, I think I might like to leave until next time because I just can't seem to keep my voice. But does anyone have any? So is anybody like, okay, Turing machines, the mind, what what is all this about? What are we doing here? Anybody confused? Anybody like, why are we talking about all of this, Professor? What is the importance of all of this Turing machine stuff to functionalism? Well, as Kim says in this chapter, Turing machines are imaginary, but we could build any number of different sorts of computers that we want, right? Again, if the church Turing thesis is correct, then all digital computers are just Turing machines. We could make a Turing machine out of gears and little mechanical bits. That's what Charles Babbage designed in the late 19th century. The first digital computer, yes, was designed before Turing formalized the notion of computation. Designed by Charles Babbage, who was the Lucasian professor of mathematics at Cambridge at the time, but it was never completed. Although we did build a version of it later in the 20th century, and it worked exactly how Babbage planned it out. And in fact, the first person to write a program for this was the lady Ava Lovelace. She wrote a procedure for something to do with Bernoulli numbers. So Ada Lovelace is actually considered to be the first computer programmer for that reason. Uh, but yeah, we could make it so even though this was it's made of gears and so forth, and you might think of it as analog. No, it's actually a digital computer because the analytical engine, it's a discrete state machine. It can only be in one state at a time. So the representations it uses are discrete as opposed to continuous. That's why it would be digital rather than analog. This is the laptop I'm using right now to lecture to you is a digital computer. You could even make a digital computer out of, you can make like a hydraulic digital computer, although that probably wouldn't work very well. It would be very slow and probably would spring leaks all the time. The problem is you can, or the idea is you can implement any Turing machine in any number of different physical substrates. What matters are the logical states of the machine. What matters is what is in that machine table. And the idea here that what Kim, I think the number one takeaway from what Kim has written in this chapter is that what matters, what makes you a Turing machine, what makes the mind a Turing machine, is the fact that it is a physical implementation of of the machine table of a probabilistic Turing machine, a computer. Okay, any questions? It's okay if you get it, great. But if you're like, what? Don't be shy. Lee's got it. Good. Anyone else? Don't be afraid. Like, if you're not following this, let me know. Samantha, if you're learning about this in another course, I suspect you're super good. Yeah, that's okay, Holly. You want the realization. And all you need to keep in mind is that for humans, if we are computers, if our minds are probabilistic Turing machines, then it's our brains that are realizing the machine table, right? That's it. That's all you need to know. It could be something else. It could be an alien physiology. It could be a non-human animal physiology. It could be like a robot or a computer. The physical realization doesn't matter. What matters is the logical states of the machine, and those are all on the machine table. Liam's good because he's a computer science major, so this is all probably pretty elementary for Liam and for those like him, and that's good. Um, Kim does deal with something interesting. There's an interesting objection to machine functionalism, and that is that, to say that I am a Turing machine is to say that I'm not physically equivalent to a Turing machine with such and such a table, but I'm psychologically equivalent to a Turing machine table of such and such a kind. And something like an octopus is going to be psychologically equivalent to a Turing machine table of such and such a kind. But it would be absurd to say that those two machine tables are psychologically equivalent to one another because we're so radically different. The solution there is to say that each of us is just an implementation of a part of a complete machine table, a machine table that could describe any possible psychological state for any possible organism. A sort of universal mind Turing machine, if you like. And maybe I implement a bit of that table and the octopus implements a bit of that machine table. So, yeah, of course, I'm not psychologically equivalent to an octopus. But the Turing machine table has to be complete in the sense that it could describe, if we just look at pain, it would have to contain all of the states that any organism capable of being in pain could possibly have. And this is really interesting because, the one thing that functionalism really does not do, like I love functionalism, but one thing it does not address is qualia, right? Like why does pain hurt and cause me to make winces and groans? And why does itching cause me to scratch as opposed to the other way around? Functionalism doesn't explain that. It's still, one of those hard problems, as Chalmers would call it. So good. And you know what? Like, if there's anything you're not clear on after this, ask me at any time because again, this is my area. This is what I do. Um, is the Turing machine immaterial in this example? No, no. Oh, good. I'm glad you brought this up. If you're a machine functionalist, you actually do believe you're a non-reductive physicalist. So mental states, being logical states of the machine, actually do have causal powers. Yeah. So the mind is not immaterial. The mind is abstract. It's like a formal relation. The mind is like all of the sum total of relations between all of the different parts of the system. And it's not immaterial in the sense of like a Cartesian ego, right? Like a res cogitans. So it's abstract, but it's still real. Like the equator, right? The equator is abstract, but it's a real thing. Does that make sense? I just mean like when I say abstract, I mean non-concrete. Like the concrete details would be the implementational details. The how the Turing machine is implemented. The abstract stuff, that's the logical or formal aspects of the system. So that's like what do the symbols represent, and how do the different states of the machine causally affect other states of the machine. Well, the equator is more than just a concept. It's there. It's just it's an abstract thing. It's just not a concrete thing. Concepts are in philosophy, a concept is a technical term which means like a mental item. And of course, we all have a concept of the equator, but then there is an actual equator, which is the going around the Earth at its widest point. Um, but if you go to the equator, you won't like find a line that says equator, right? Um, yeah. Or like the geographical North Pole. If you go there, I mean, maybe somebody stuck a sign there that says this is geographic north. Um, but the actual geographic North Pole is an abstract thing. And yeah, so what matters for like if you're a realist, you can be an this is something else Kim talks about in this chapter, right? You can be an instrumentalist or a realist about minds as Turing machines. If you're an instrumentalist, you don't care whether all of the states of the machine are like real or not. You just care that Turing machine explanations explain. It's kind of like if you were a physicist and you're talking about quarks, right? Those smallest particles. And you're kind of like, if you're an instrumentalist, you're like, well, quarks might be real or they might just be theoretical objects that allow us to successfully make predictions about the natural world. You don't care if quarks are real or not. They work. They work in your theories, but you don't care if they're actually out there. A realist would say, well, the reason why quarks are useful theoretical entities in our in our explanations of the world is because they actually exist. Same with this. When it comes to it, oh, okay, guys. Yeah, more cold fluid. My coffee is cold by now, but that's fine. Now, okay, guys, do you want to talk about the Turing test and the Chinese room? Um, yeah, it's been over a week. I feel good. It's just that my throat won't stop doing this. Yeah, I just don't want to fall behind. Mm. Searle. Searle. Yeah. Yeah, it is a bit easier to get this stuff. Uh, I really want to continue, guys. I'm just not sure if I can do it. I'll tell you what, let's take another break. Well, there are 40 slides, so that means I have 14 more slides to get through. I don't know, guys. I really don't want to cut class short, but I'm having a lot of trouble talking here. Um, yeah, long lasting. Yeah, yeah, I don't know what this is. If I don't know what I never went to the clinic. Could have been a cold flu. It could have been COVID. It could have been maybe some bronchitis. Yeah, maybe some ice on there. I just took I just took like this really kick-ass cough syrup and it's doing nothing. So, um guys, I think maybe we should continue this on Monday. Well, it's coffee, but it's cold by now. Okay, look, let's take a 5-minute break and then I will try and finish this. So we'll come back at 4:45. Yeah, I know that's the problem. Is I want to recover, but my job involves talking. It's a bit of a catch-22. Yeah, so yeah, Cepacol. Well, I have cough syrup. So my I'm staying at my partner's place in North Bay. Her mom was a nurse. She's got the best cough syrup. Um I've been taking that cough syrup and it's not working. Okay, I'm gonna come back at 4:45 and then we'll try and continue. Okay, see you in 5 minutes. Well, that cough syrup hasn't kicked in yet, but let's carry on. So this is the most fun part of the chapter. Um, the Turing test, a sort of test of mentality, if you like. Um, which I'm going to go more into the background behind this than Kim does. But basically, in the 1950s, he proposes this imitation game, Turing does, in order to replace the question, can machines think? Because Turing thought that this was too meaningless to deserve discussion, right? Nowadays, we call this test the Turing test, and it's an operationalist test of intelligence. And we've encountered this notion of operationalism before. That's when we try to make something that is unmeasurable, in this case, thinking, measurable by focusing on something that is observable and that is associated with it, like speaking. For the behaviorists, for the logical and psychological behaviorists, this was behavior. For some of those people, it was also verbal behavior. For Turing, it is verbal behavior. And the test is really whether somebody can distinguish between a human and a machine based on verbal behavior. And if they can't, then we have to grant that whatever it is that we're communicating with is capable of thinking. This is the original formulation of the game. There were actually three players, a man, a woman, and an interrogator. And C, the interrogator, is asking questions of A and B, the man and the woman. And C is trying to identify who is the man and who's the woman based on the answers of A and B. A is the man, but he's trying to fool C into making the wrong guess. B is the woman, and she is trying to help C make the right guess. Now the question is, what happens when we replace one of these players, let's say A, with a machine? If the machine was convincingly human-like in its conversational abilities, we would have to grant that it's human or that it is thinking. Later on is when we actually get the simplified version of the Turing test that most people are familiar with today, where there are only two players. Um, there's the interrogator, and then there is the first. Well, we'll just call player one, who could be it could be a human or it could be a machine. And the interrogator asks questions of the player in the style of a viva voce examination. That's Latin for in living voice. Viva Voce is, well, it used to be a party game. You might have played something similar to it, actually. Do you know that party game where we write down maybe the names of famous individuals on cards and you stick one to your head? So you don't know what the card says, but it says it on the card and everyone else can say it. And then everyone else you're playing with has to give you clues. Like you ask questions and everyone else knows who you are, but you don't know who you are. And so you ask questions of everyone, and then based on their answers, you have to guess who you are. That's kind of like this game. Viva Voce is also kind of the thing you do when you do a thesis defense, right? In order to check whether you have actually made an original contribution to knowledge and that you know what you're talking about, as opposed to, say, having learned something by rote, right? So, probably none of you have done this yet, but some of you almost certainly will in the future. When you're in your defense committee, your defense committee is asking you questions, and whether you pass your defense depends on how well you answer those questions. That's also a viva voce style examination. In fact, to this day in the UK, your thesis defense is called a viva. When you pass your, here we say in North America we say I passed my defense. In the UK they say I passed my viva. Um, and in the context of the Turing test, if the interrogator can't tell whether they're talking to a machine or a person, the test is passed. And that's the version of the Turing test that we think of nowadays. Something I really must emphasize is that it is not about deception. The Turing test is not about deception. The point of the test is not for the computer to deceive you into believing that you're talking to a person. That's not what it's about. Even though in some of his interviews, Turing almost kind of characterizes that way. Like if a computer can fool the interrogator into thinking the computer is a human. That's not the point of the test. It's not about deception. It is about whether the verbal behavior of whatever it is you're talking to is judged to be the kind of verbal behavior that is typical of a thing with a mind. Okay? Now, there's actually a few different ways we can think of the Turing test. One is as a thought experiment or a conceivability argument. Right? Like in Turing's paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, he asks whether there are imaginable digital computers which would do well in the imitation game. Because of course, computers at that time couldn't have played this game and stood any chance of passing the test. Um, so, is it conceivable that a Turing machine could pass the Turing test? Well, in a sense, it ought to be. Right, because if machine functionalism is true, and all of us are, all creatures with mentality are really just Turing machines of a sort, then yeah, sure, there are imaginable digital computers that would do well in the imitation game, and they are us. Um, but but that's not really what Turing means. Turing wants to know if there is a digital computer, like a computing machine, which, if it were suitably programmed and powerful enough, could convince somebody that it is a human and not a computer. Again, that's not about deception. It's about whether the machine displays the type of verbal behavior that is indicative of a mind. So that's the thought experiment version. You can also use the Turing test as an actual empirical test. And it has sort of been done, not really in a scientific way. But here's an example again from Computing Machinery and Intelligence. In about 50 years' time, so around the year 2000, which is, Turing's writing this in 1950. So say in the year 2000, thereabouts, it will be possible to program computers with a storage capacity of about 10 to the ninth power to make them play the imitation game so well that an average interrogator will not have more than 70% chance of making the right identification after 5 minutes of questioning. So here it's like a test of whether a particular machine can think. And in fact, there's a really interesting paper that came out recently where they did this with ChatGPT. They submitted ChatGPT to a Turing test, and a lot of folks were convinced they were talking to a human and not a computer program. Does ChatGPT actually pass the Turing test? If you ask me, no, it doesn't, because it does not take long. Um, it really does not take long, especially if you have some expertise in this area, to notice what is computer like about ChatGPT's responses. So it really depends on how long you're interacting with it and what your level of expertise is. I mean, The very first chatbot, Eliza, which was programmed by Joseph Weizenbaum in the 1960s at MIT, was claimed to have passed the Turing test because it convinced Weizenbaum's secretary that she was talking to a human rather than a computer. None of us today would be convinced by Eliza. Eliza would not pass the Turing test if any of us were the ones conducting the test, talking to Eliza. Does ChatGPT pass the Turing test for certain individuals now? Yes. 20 years from now, I don't think that the version of chat like GTP4 right now, I think 20 years in the future, it would not fool anyone. Um, so is the Turing test really a good empirical test? I don't think it is an actually good empirical test for particular machines. I think it works better as a thought experiment. I also think, and this is what my PhD thesis was about, is that there is a third way to think of the Turing test. Sure, you can think of it as a thought experiment. You can think of it as an empirical test, as a sort of other directed empirical test. But you can also think of it as a reflexive empirical test, not about whether the machines we're using are thinking or not, but rather as an experimental vehicle for understanding more about how human beings uh, think about, interact with, perceive, interact with, and think about artificial minds. And that, I think, is going to be the real application of the Turing test in the next few years, if I can ever get around to publishing that. Which, who knows, given how busy I am. But that's the idea, is that, yeah, the two ways we've been thinking about the Turing test they're fine, but there's a new way to use it, and a new way we ought to start using it. And that is not as of a test of machine intelligence, either in terms of like actual empirical tests or thought experiments, but as a way to understand more about how we understand artificial minds. Now, granted, that's very far afield from what Turing originally imagined, but I think that even the way Turing talks about his own tests evidences that we can use the test this way, and that would be fruitful. Anyway, the Turing test is also quite Cartesian. So look at this, for example. This is what Rene Descartes says in the Discourses on the Method. If there were machines bearing the image of our bodies and capable of imitating our actions as far as it is morally possible, there would still remain two most certain tests whereby to know that they were not therefore really men. So imagine there were automata that looked and acted exactly like we do, like completely physically indistinguishable from human beings. Descartes says we could still know they're machines and not people by means of the following test. Of these, the first is that they could never use words or other signs arranged in such a manner as is competent to us in order to declare our thoughts to others. So they couldn't use language to declare their thoughts to others the way we can. Notice this is kind of like this is Hobbes' view of what thinking is. Very close to what Hobbes thinks thinking is. The second test is that although such machines might execute many things with equal or perhaps greater perfection than any of us, they would without doubt fail in certain others from which it could be discovered that they did not act from knowledge, but solely from the disposition of their organs. Right? So we can use reason as a universal instrument. We're probabilistic Turing machines, right? If the Turing machine functionalism is true, but these automata are not like that. They're completely determined, and eventually their behavior would give it away to us that they are behaving, in a deterministic way, and not in this way where they can use reason as a universal instrument. Um, Another difference is that where Descartes says a machine could never do this, Turing says, well, if a machine could do this, we'd have to grant that it's thinking. So that's very interesting to me. Again, I'm kind of surprised that Kim does not bring this up. given that he bookends this whole textbook with the Descartes and the mind-body problem. I find it's an interesting point of contact that went un point of contacted, if I can put it that way. Granted, Turing was not as focused on the body as Descartes was. Now, Turing and Descartes were both mechanistic philosophers in a sense, but Descartes was certainly not an atheist, and Turing probably was, especially in his adult life. And that could have been because of the death of Christopher Morcom, his close childhood friend, possibly his first love. If the movie gets it right. But Christopher Morcom, and again, this is something we see in the Imitation Game, right? He died of bovine tuberculosis when he was young. You know, this is why you shouldn't drink unpasteurized milk. A lot of those people, the crunchy people, drink raw milk, avoid seed oils, etc., etc. Well, you don't want to go the way Christopher Morcom did with the bovine tuberculosis. But Turing is not focused on he's not quite interested in like an embodied thinking machine, right? He writes that it is possible at some time creating a robot that's indistinguishable from a human might be done, but even supposing this invention available, we should find there is little point in trying to make a thinking machine more human by dressing it up in such artificial flesh. Rather, it's the intellectual capacities that we ought to imitate. So here's an example of the sort of conversation you might see in a Turing test. You might ask, please write me a sonnet on the subject of the fourth bridge. Count me out on this one. I could never write poetry. Maybe you ask it to sum two very large numbers, and the computer pauses to avoid giving away that it is a computer, and then gives you the answer. You could give it a chess problem, and it could answer the chess problem after a pause, right? Uh, Now, one of the interesting things about Turing is that he doesn't really define what he means by thinking, right? That's how he starts off the paper, right? Thinking, can machines think? This question is too meaningless to deserve discussion because we'd have to define what we mean by computer and then define what we mean by thinking, and no one's going to agree on that. And then immediately defines what a computer is. He says it's a discrete state machine. Um, and he does actually seem to have something in mind. Like when he uses this word thinking, he does have something in mind. He seems to mean using reason in a domain general way, expressing it linguistically, and doing so non deterministically, or at least with the appearance thereof. Um, that again, this is more my own argument. This is from my PhD thesis. Putnam makes the move from deterministic to probabilistic Turing machines as well. Although, that idea is also present in Turing's work. Like that's not an original contribution by Putnam. Like Turing did say that we'd have to make these things not random, but at least appear to not operate deterministically. And he does this in response to Lady Lovelace's objection, an objection named after Count Ada, Countess of Lovelace, the first computer programmer, who, when talking about Babbage's analytical engine, says like it doesn't know how to do anything; it only does what we tell it to. Right? It can't do anything original. And I would say this objection holds pretty well, even up to generative AI, even up to the generative AI stuff that we have today, right? Is it a good test of intelligence? What do you think? Is the Turing test a good test of intelligence? Let's give my voice a break and let's hear from some of you. What do you think? If something passes the Turing test, do you think that that means it thinks? I mean, all of you, when you talk to me and I talk to you over this Zoom interface, you're all passing the Turing test, right? When I type out in the chat in answer to one of your questions, feels like I'm communicating with something else that has a mind. So maybe, as Kim says, it's like doing what you need to do to pass the Turing test is perhaps a sufficient characteristic of the mental, but maybe not a necessary one. Yeah. So Joshua says maybe it's not a good test because we can always build machines that appear to pass it, even though there's nothing mental happening there. Yeah. So yeah, Paul, that's like Lady Lovelace's objection, which you can read about in the paper by Turing. Yeah, maybe it's a test of humanity more than of thought. Maybe. My thinking, and again, this is something I argued in my PhD, was that I kind of ironically, we don't need the Turing test as a test of intelligence. Not if you're a computationalist. Like if you've defined cognition as computation, then you don't need the Turing test because we're all computers anyway. So yeah, computers can think. That's what cognition is. Um, that's one way to look at it. You don't have to accept that. You might not be a computationalist. But if you are a computationalist, you don't need the Turing test. Um, yeah, maybe it would be vastly different if we were communicating with aliens, likely. Yep, says. Oh. John Searle also does not think the Turing test is a good test of intelligence. He shows this with his Chinese room thought experiment. So imagine you're sitting in a room. Now, you don't read any Chinese. You don't speak Chinese. You don't understand any Chinese at all. Only English. You can listen. You can understand orally. You can speak. You can read it. And you're in this room, and people are passing you little bits of paper with messages on them, and the messages are written in Chinese characters. Now, you can't read those characters. You don't understand what they mean. But you want to communicate with the people outside of the room. And the people outside of the room are all native Chinese speakers, so they can all read those Chinese characters. Lucky for you, you have a rule book in the room, which says it's got an exhaustive list of instructions for how to respond to any conceivable string of symbols that you might receive. So you receive a string of symbols and you don't know what it means, but you look it up in your rule book and it says if you get this string, respond with this string. So you don't know what anything means, but the people outside of the room that they've written down like "Hello, how are you?" and they pass it in, and then they get a message back, "I am well, how are you?" in Chinese characters, and it looks to them like whatever's in the room, barring the time it takes for you to look up how to respond. Like let's pretend that's not a factor. It seems based on your verbal behavior that you understand Chinese, even though you have no understanding of Chinese. But you don't understand Chinese, right? You're just manipulating inputs and outputs according to the rules of the program. You're working the syntax, but you're blind to the semantics. So there can be syntactic manipulation, syntactic symbol manipulation with no semantics, no intelligence or understanding. And the way Searle would put it is that the semantics is parasitic to the syntax. What's really missing is that you're not hooked up to the world, right? You're not connected to the world when you're in the Chinese room. And so that's related to something called the symbol grounding problem, which is well outside of I think the scope of what we're able to discuss today. But the point is, the person in the Chinese room with the messages being passed in and out and with her rule book is meant to be like a computer running a program. The person in the room doesn't understand Chinese, and she's successfully communicating with people outside of the room without this understanding of what any of the symbols mean. And Searle thinks the same thing goes for computers. They don't understand anything, so they can't be intelligent. And if he's right, then the Turing test is not a good test, right? What do you think? Um, so Lee says the thing is, a thing with this is that ChatGPT does actually understand the language, though, doesn't it? I would say no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Because no, ChatGPT actually, I think, illustrates the exact thing that Searle is saying. Uh, ChatGPT almost seems like it passes the Turing test, but it doesn't know anything. All ChatGPT does is take your prompt and output a response based on how it's been trained and given what you've asked it to do, what the statistically most likely word is to come next. Doesn't know what it's doing. Yeah. So Samuel agrees with Searle. That's fair. Um, okay. Liam says neurons don't know what chemicals mean and pass around transmitters in the same way. So the difference is in perception. We perceive understanding, so it comes to etc. Okay. So I think what you're trying to say is that the parts of the system don't understand anything, but the whole system does, right? It's like I know that I am a human named Josh. None of the cells in my brain know that. It's the whole organism that knows that, right? Well, ChatGPT doesn't understand anything. And ChatGPT also is not hooked up to the world. Yeah, we trained, we have heuristics, sure, but we're also embodied and embedded in an environment. ChatGPT isn't. Holly agrees with the syntax semantics distinction. Yeah. Okay. Um, so I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of Searle. Um, but I do think he has a point. The environment is how meaning is grounded. Like if we're all computers and the brain, the synaptic connections in the brain are really just the physical realizations of the symbols that feature in the Turing machines that are our minds. Those symbols get their meaning because it's all grounded in the world. Think back to Wittgenstein, right? How the meaning of pain terms and pain behavior is fixed because we're all playing this shared language game with one another. It's kind of similar idea here, right? Imagine you were okay. Here's the thing. Imagine you were trying to learn a new language. How do you learn a new language? Do you just read the dictionary? You have to be you have to be put into the world, immersed into the world of those speakers. You can't learn a language by just reading a dictionary. Um, well, that's not the same kind of dynamic physical environment that we find ourselves in. It is an environment, but it's not the right kind of environment. Yeah, and that's another thing Samantha points out is like, yeah, we're experiencers. ChatGPT, I don't think has experience. There's nothing it's like to be ChatGPT. Um, so yeah, when I say world, I mean like the world, the physical world, not a world of ones and zeros. If we could put ChatGPT into a robot and have it go out into the world, maybe we could say it understands something, but it's not connected to the world in the right way. If you want to see what I mean, like look at what Kim says about trying to like say you speak Korean and you want to learn Japanese, so you get like a Korean Japanese dictionary and you start mapping terms onto other terms like from Korean to Japanese. Now you'll know how to translate from Korean to Japanese and vice versa, but you won't know what anything means because you're stuck in a dictionary and you're not out there in the world. That's what these AI are like. It's related to something called the symbol grounding problem, which gets you into the work of like Stephen Harnad and the total Turing test. It's like a whole thing. Like I'll tell you all about it sometime when my throat feels a little bit better. Um, this is all thought experiments and stuff, though, right? So there are really no right answers. Some of you are going to agree with Searle. Some of you are going to agree with maybe Turing. Um, there are also these replies, these very famous replies to Searle, like the systems reply. So maybe the person in the room, in the Chinese room, doesn't understand Chinese, but she is still behaving intelligently in a sense, right? She's able to look up things in the rule book, match the appropriate outputs to the inputs she's receiving. So maybe we can talk about understanding Chinese in terms of these more basic forms of understanding. And so maybe Searle's looking for intelligence in the wrong place, right? It's not the person that does or doesn't understand Chinese, it's the whole system. Just like how in my brain, there's no single neuron that knows that I am a philosophy professor, but the whole being that is me knows that I am a philosophy professor, right? That's the idea, right? Uh, you need to be in a world that you can sense and act within. And that's what grounds the meaning of symbols for us. But maybe the whole system understands Chinese. Or maybe the robot reply, right? The room doesn't, the whole room doesn't understand Chinese, but embodied agents, and this is very much what I've been talking about. Embodied agents understand Chinese, right? Understanding Chinese involves interacting with other Chinese speakers in a Chinese society where we're all, in Wittgenstein's terms, playing the same language game. Um, so the meanings of our words, which are also a type of symbol, are grounded in these sort of ways we interact with the world and with each other, right? So maybe if we shrank the Chinese room down, put it in a robot body with the right sensors and effectors, and put it in the right environment, maybe it would start behaving intelligently. Searle would still deny that there is no intelligence as long as our Chinese room is just a physical symbol system. But again, you can agree or disagree with Searle. I can't believe we made it, guys. I know I went a little bit fast toward the end. That's just because now I'm not coughing, but my throat just hurts. So I think we'll leave it there, unless there are um, other questions. Are there any questions about anything I've said? It's always frustrating when I teach this chapter because it really just scratches the surface of all of this, and I could go for hours and hours. But I can't because my everything hurts. Oh, I think I have it on ResearchGate, Paul. I mean, it's not anything super spectacular. I mean, read it if you want, I guess. I don't know. I kind of cringe at it, you know, because I feel like I could have done it so much better. But that's just how it is. That's just being an academic, right? But yeah, ResearchGate. You can also find it via the Carleton University Library. So if you really want to read it, yeah, no problem, Holly. You can email me your question. But if there are no other questions, I think we'll leave it there. I think there was somebody that actually wanted to speak to me for a couple of minutes, so I'll end the recording, and then once everybody's gone, I can speak to whoever that was. I forget your name. I'm sorry. But thanks everybody for bearing with me. I think yeah, no problem, Liam. Thanks for sticking with me, even though I'm coughing and hacking up all kinds of internal organs. Um, so I'll see you on Monday. We're going to be talking about causal theoretical functionalism. I should be feeling better by then. I think my voice should be back to normal. Now that the lecture's ending, the cough syrup's finally kicked in. So thanks for all your well wishes, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now, everyone.